Well, hello, this is going to be my second time starting the recording, so hopefully I won't have technical difficulties. Sorry I'm not coming to you live this evening. Had a few too many things on the schedule, but I thought I'd do a special treat for you and actually give you a tour of my home garden. So I spent the weekend working in the garden and looking at all the issues that I have to try to take care of this year. I thought that would be a good introduction for our integrated pest management, or how to look at all the issues you have and how you're going to take care of them. So I'm going to start out with some good pictures of what my garden has looked like in the past, and then all of the ugly pictures. And so I think Diane mentioned that no one takes the ugly pictures. And when we went to Jan's house for composting, I commented that it's a hard time of year to go to somebody's garden. It's just not a very pretty time of year when you still need to do all that cleanup from last year and get started for the new year. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're gonna take a little tour. Okay, so this first picture I lovingly refer to as the Kraken. This is a juniper bush that used to live in the corner of my yard. And it's my symbol of when there's really big problems, there's still a solution and you can still take care of them. This we removed 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm still working on the corner where this used to sit. This took an extremely large tractor loader to remove, and it fought all the way. And I'm still occasionally digging up a root or two, but no matter how big the problem, we can definitely find a solution. So this is my front flower bed, and I'm going to show you an extremely ugly picture of my front flower bed here in a little bit. This is the bed that had bindweed in it so bad that I ended up removing all of the flowers and just spending a whole year spraying every time bindweed came up. It used to have hollyhocks in it. Those may not be the best choice for a small perennial bed, as they've kind of took over in the end. The yellow flower in the corner, I don't even remember the name of it anymore. It was also very aggressive, and it would die out about mid-July, so it left a kind of an ugly dead plant in the corner. But at this stage in the spring, it was all put together and looking the way that I wanted to. So I think one of the things we have to understand about integrative pest management, or looking at our problems, is that it's going to be each part of the season has its own challenges, and so sometimes it may be beautiful and other times it may not be exactly how you wanted it. So this is a flower bed that runs from the road clear down the side of my driveway, and we will see different portions of it throughout this tour. I really like the bricks. They were something that I could lay one at a time and were pretty easy to lay down. I think they're about $1 a piece at your local Buy Mart. It also gives me that dividing line. So on one side there's flowers, and on the other side there's weeds. I think in the foreground there I think that's either a puncture vine or a bindweed or a mallow sneaking out of the, but I can go along there and spray, or I'm working on weed flaming this year. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is kind of my show garden. I've kind of transitioned. This was mostly annuals when I first put it in, and I've tried to go into perennials, and we'll talk about why I might be going back to annuals. So one of the main reasons I garden is for the delicious tomatoes and food. So there's a few examples of my first harvest a couple years ago with a couple cucumbers, pickling cucumbers, and some different colored tomatoes. This is also in the front of my house, at the bottom of my porch. This flower bed used to be covered in black plastic and rock, and started out with some really bad soil. It's still kind of sandy and gives me a little bit of trouble, so I've just chosen plants that really like that sandy soil and don't seem to mind. So we've got Rudbeckia and Giardia, that yellow flower that I can't remember the name of there, a few little snapdragons. This bed tends to get a whole lot of sun, being on the south side of my house, but now that I've got the soil improved, grows things really nice, and we'll see what it looks like currently in just a few slides. So one of the things I'm trying to come back from in my garden and trying to decide, exactly how much time I have to be able to devote to fixing this. This is my hoop house. As I said, I originally designed it. They're not really designed with snow load in mind. As you can see, we got quite a bit of snow on there before it fell down. So what I'm dealing with now is something that looks like this. So this was actually last spring, and I've got all the torn plastic removed and all those middle vanes. The two end vanes, or the two end hoops, are still sitting out there, and the weeds that had grown in the hoop house are still there. So trying to figure out, this is how I used to manage this area, and I really enjoyed that hoop house, but the amount of time that I have to do it is a little bit harder. So I got to try to figure out what my next plan is going to be. And here's looking out on my front yard on a beautiful sunset. So I'm very fortunate to live out in the country and have this great view. But it also comes with its own challenges, is that how they manage that field next to me and across from me affects what I'm able to do in my garden. So this is this is a crab apple tree in the middle. It's now 2 years old. I've planted a little circular ring there with some flowers in it. You can see what that currently looks like here in a few slides. My yarrow bed is that up front next to the road, and then perennials and shrubs all along the side. That kraken that you saw in the first picture used to sit by that telephone pole and take up that whole corner. So I've tried to replace that with shrubs and perennials. And I actually have a yard. There has been times that this yard has been set fallow all season, like we've tilled it up and didn't get it replanted. So just that I have a green front yard is a beautiful thing in this picture. And then what I really like is I try to garden for the beneficial insects. So this was a gigantic bumblebee that came out last spring, and kind of gives me my purpose for what I'm doing. So I don't want to use a lot of harsh chemicals, and I don't want to keep a completely clean landscape, because that's not the best for attracting beneficial insects. So I try to keep that in mind as you look at all my weeds and you want to do scorched earth and start from a clean slate. I don't want to hurt what I have going on there. Okay, so here we go for ugly picture tour. So this is sitting underneath a pine tree. You can see all the little pine needles. Not a very attractive pine tree, or one that's in the greatest health. And a couple years ago, I planted beautiful tulips underneath there, and they were a type of tulip that's not fully perennial, which I didn't quite realize when I put them in. So every year, and this is 4 years later, I have these starts of tulips that pop up this time of year, and have never gotten a bloom out of them again. So I've got to decide what I'm going to do with this area and what I'm going to replant. It tends to get really dry with that pine tree sucking up most of the water out of that bed. It has a lot of shallow roots. And then it's also really shady underneath there. So I've tried a couple different things, and right now we have these parts of tulips and cheatgrass wanting to occupy this bed. So here's the end of that, the borders on my driveway, where I've got my stones are still in place, and that is doing quite good. My gravel path, so I thought it would be really nice. I didn't want this bed. I've actually got probably 12 feet. The corrals sit on the left-hand side. So that would be too wide of bed to work. So I put this gravel pathway here and down the back, and also to try to train my children not to run through my flower beds. And at the time, I put landscape fabric down and rock down, and those first 2 years it was beautiful and functioned great. Now I've gotten the soil and the debris into those rocks, and so now it just grows weeds horribly. And I haven't quite decided what to do, because picking up all that rock and getting it back off and then figuring out how to put a different kind of path in is a lot of manual labor, and I have to try to figure out if I'm willing to do that or not. So this is one of the decisions I'm trying to make. But in the long term, that landscape fabric just doesn't do what you want it to do, unfortunately. And rock may have not been the best choice, because now when I need to go replace and clean it, am I going to screen it and put it back down? If I'm going to move it to another area, it's kind of created an issue for me. Oh, and this picture's turned sideways, so everybody just turn their head to the right. We might, let's see if I can fix it They have a rotator here. I don't know if it's actually going to do it or not. Oh, there we go. Oh, now we're spinning. Hopefully nobody gets car sick. Okay, so here's a closer look at that path I was talking about. And that bed. So at one time I bought chunky bark thinking that that would be a good mulch cover, and you can see I just have huge chunks of that, but some soil showing. Now I've got cheatgrass coming up. We actually took the flame weeder to the cheatgrass, so that's some of those burn spots you see. We're going to see if we could slow it down. It's really hard to spray out this time of year just because, you know, the weather was nice this weekend, it's nice today, it's going to be horrible tomorrow. So try to get a consistent heat and growing level this early in the spring can be hard to do. Oh, so this poor shrub, I bought this shrub from D&B at the end of their season and got it planted. And then I was trying to keep it wet. And at the same time, we had brand new puppies at the house. We had a litter of puppies. And so every time I'd water next to the shrub, they would go increase the size of the hole. So they've undug the shrub over and over and over again. And bless its heart, it's got little buds on it. So it's still trying to survive. So next weekend, I'm going to try to get some soil on it and, and give it a proper planting. Poor little thing. So here's a closer picture that it actually is alive and does have buds. I'm trying to remember what this one is. So I chose kind of all hardy shrubs that were going to make it in our area. So maybe that's why it's had a chance for survival. So here's the next shrub down, and this is actually a Rose of Sharon shrub, and it's budding out and coming back nicely. You can see the drip line kind of running in the background there. So that's what this bed kind of looks like now. The shrubs are starting to come alive. I've got a lot of litter left from last year, a lot of sunflower litter. I've got some cheatgrass coming up in the background. So I can't go through here and just annihilate or spray, or I'm going to lose these shrubs, but I've got a lot of cleanup to do. So this is a picture's not quite in focus, but this is on one of the shrubs, and this would be a praying mantis casing. So if you find these when you're cleaning up, maybe one of the reasons not to clean up too starkly. This is attached to one of the shrubs that I planted, but this is an egg casing, and little praying mantises will come out of that in the spring. And praying mantises are great beneficial insects, so I want to be sure not to disturb that because they're going to help me out a little later on here. Mallow, my least favorite plant in the world, is starting to come alive and green up. So this is actually part of a gigantic mallow plant. So there's only a few little green leaves here, but if I went to tug on this and it's not budging, it probably has a root that's 2 feet deep. So I'm gonna have to get the shovel and go through and try to pop these out because they will be way too big by the time it's time to actually spray them and get rid of them that way. So some other weeds that I'm seeing, being able to do weed ID at this stage is really helpful so you can kind of plan ahead and know what you have coming. They're also really easy to till under and get rid of at this stage. So the frilly little one, I'm guessing is probably flaxweed. So kind of a yellow flower in the mustard family. Some of those more broadleaf ones, I know I have purple mustard in this bed, and I'm not sure if the prickly lettuce is sprouting quite this early, but I'm guessing there's some prickly lettuce, and then the grass is downy brome or cheatgrass. So after dealing with them years after years, I know what I've got there, and this is not too bad. I've really paid attention to those early spring weeds and did a lot of pulling in this bed. So despite the coverage I have here, it's actually less than I've had in previous years. Oh, let me rotate again here. So these are irises starting to come up, and they're actually miniature irises, so total height is like 6 inches tall with blooms. They're one of my favorite. I like the little tiny guys, and they're kind of tucked in as a ground cover, and they're always really hardy, and I won't be able to see them. They'll come up and they'll bloom, and I'll have just a little hedge of foliage so they fit into my perennial bed quite nicely. But once again, I have a perennial in this bed, which makes weed control a little bit more challenging. If I came through here with 2,4-D or Roundup, I would affect the irises. It doesn't often kill them. They're pretty hardy, but it would yellow their foliage, and they probably wouldn't bloom this year if I got too crazy with the spray. So this little plant looks weedy, but it's not. This is my dragon's blood sedum, and it's actually done a nice job of traveling and acting as a ground cover, and I don't have too many weeds coming up underneath it. So it was nice to see this waking up so quickly, so it might be a candidate for future weed control just because it gets up and going so early in the spring. Might choke out some of the things I'm trying to prevent. Plant identification is a huge part of being able to do this. So this looks fairly weedy, but this is actually an echinacea that's popping and growing up, and you'd hate to accidentally pull that. I did trim off some of the stems and rake up some of these leaves. I do have some little weed seedlings right around it that I'll have to take care of. Okay, so looking off to the right, that's the bed that we were just in. Now on the other side of the driveway is my lawn. As you can see, I've got some budding soccer players, so we've got a soccer goal set up in the lawn, and the kids are really enjoying that area. So as much as I'm anti-lawn, I'm glad they have a place to play soccer. So next step is I need to install a border here. So this is driveway to lawn. As you can see, I don't have a straight line, and I've got weeds invading the lawns and lawn invading the driveway. And so up on my list is to have a defendable border, kind of like I do on the side of that perennial bed. This is also where the puncture vine gets really bad. I think some of those twigs and sticks you can see there are actually old puncture vine carcasses. I did a pretty good job at controlling this last year, but my kids get off the bus and walk down here and walk up on the porch into the house, and then we step on puncture vine for the rest of the season. So this is a pretty important area for control for me. There's little daffodils coming up in my front flower bed. This reminds me that I'd always like to plant more bulbs, but you need to think about that in fall. It seems like I really wear out in the fall and I never get those planted, but that's kind of my reminder of, oh yeah, it's so nice to see those come up. I need to put more of those in. So this is my yarrow waking back up. Yarrow's a native plant. I actually planted the whole front of my yard in yarrow 5 years ago, right before I started with the extension. I grew the little seedlings in July and August in my basement under the lights, and then I come and plopped in, I think I had 72 seedlings. I had filled a full tray with them. They all came up nicely. I stuck them out here, and now they've just kind of fill that whole area and provide a nice border between the driveway and my road, and catches the soccer balls, and the kids can walk through it, and yarrow's tough enough, it doesn't bother it at all. So I've went through this weekend and kind of pulled out some of the dead stems and leaves, and all the little baby yarrow plants are coming up. But this bed, because it's kind of a low care bed, suffered some damage last fall, and I didn't notice until digging this spring. So these are gopher holes. This is also the bed right across the road from that field, so the gophers had got in, and then the puppy dogs had went after the gophers. So I've got some gigantic holes in this bed. No active gopher holes, so it doesn't look like they're still there. They've moved on to greener pastures, but I've got to figure out how I'm going to plug these holes, and if I'm going to plant something in with the yarrow. All the gopher eating didn't seem to slow the yarrow down, so I'm glad. It looks like it's coming back just fine, but I've got kind of a lumpy bed in there. They also kicked some dirt out on top. I think this is more the dogs going after the gophers than the gophers themselves. And so they've buried my yarrow plants in this area, so I'm going to have to move some of that dirt around and see if the yarrow is still popping up underneath it, and maybe replant that area. I've also got, I don't have edging in between the edge of the lawn and this yarrow bed. I actually removed it when we planted along. I'd made a super curvy edging, and my kids couldn't mow around that very well, and so I had weed issues right next to my border. So now I'm going to put straight edging in, but that still needs to be done. So you can see some mallow in the close-up or foreground picture there I got to take care of. So this is going towards where the kraken, the juniper bush, used to live. This shrub is doing amazing. So this was actually transplanted out of that front flower bed that had the bindweed problem. And I got to remember the name of this shrub. It actually has cute little blue flowers. It's blue mist spirea. There we go. There comes the name. The bees love it in the fall. It's a late blooming plant. It's a little slow to wake up in the spring, so all those twigs are still pretty bare and not budded out. But one of my favorite plants and does very well in my harsh conditions. So this is a little plant and maybe one of the benefits of drip irrigation. So I'm cleaning this area and I notice that there's this little circle of drip tubing and I'm like, there must be a plant or there should be a plant here. And the dogs had kicked some soil over it going after the gophers and it's just starting to wake up. So this is actually a sedum, I think an autumn joy sedum that was gigantic last year. Um, and I would have not uncovered it or may have stepped on it several times if I didn't have that drip irrigation circle telling me, look for a plant in the center. So as you can see, I still have a tag on it too, so that way I know what it is. Eventually, those tags wear off or go off, but you get a couple years to get the plant established. This is catmint starting to come out. A lot of people won't plant mints because they grow too big and they're fairly invasive. But I'm actually aiming for invasive in this area. There was a lot of Canada thistle underneath that juniper shrub, and so this area is that. If you can look at the remnants of weeds, you can see all the spines from the Canada thistle skeletons that are living in and around this. So I'm hoping this mint wakes up and spreads out before the Canada thistle wakes up. Okay, here's another example of my drip line running through there and kind of the Canada thistle mess I have going on. So this is, I've got those little green seedlings. Most of them are weeds. I've got a kid's football in there. So right now I'm kind of going in with leather gloves and pulling out, because I know I've got that Canada thistle that really hurts through normal gloves, pulling that all out. I've actually been taking a hoe and kind of getting rid of those seedlings in around the plant. So just trying to not accidentally run over those baby perennials I've got in here, but get the stuff cleaned out for next year. So here's one of my successes. I think this picture actually might be upside down, but I've got snow in summer on this right-hand side, and it's doing a good job as a ground cover for me in this new area. And the left-hand side is ice plant. Ice plant's another ground cover, and I've had trouble with winter hardiness on ice plant, but this one has made it through the winter, maybe because it's nestled right next to the snow in summer here, but looking forward to those spreading out and helping out. A not so helpful ground cover. Here's a mallow plant that has definitely woken up and is spreading, try to cover the world. So as you come around the corner, as you can see on the left-hand side, I have a field, and that's that land plane field I talk about that actually sits a little bit above the height of the yard. And so this is kind of the back border. And as you can see, I let the kochia and the prickly lettuce get out of hand a little bit last year, but I have good stuff in here. So the kind of green in the center of the photo is actually, this is a whole line of nearly wild roses, which are little white and pink roses that don't require a lot of pruning or trimming or fertilizing or spraying. So basically I just need to pull all of those weed skeletons out from around them and then do a little bit of job of weed control in this area. So this back between that rose line and the concrete ditches, I have not yet figured out what to do there. I probably need to do a cover crop or a ground cover. I try to leave this area bare because I have a perennial bed on the front side of those roses, and I do on a hard winter have to get in and prune on those roses a little bit. They die back. So I don't really either have to have a good path or a cover crop or something because I have to be able to access the roses from this backside. And also my husband tends to spray and maybe use flame to control weeds on his side of the ditch. So I have to give my roses a little bit of room there. This is kind of out of focus. This is a dogwood shrub coming into bloom. Had a really unique bloom on it. And this is kind of looking down that hill towards the yard and towards where this shrub area is that has the Canada thistle issue. Okay, here's another little shrub, and I almost lost it in the, so it's in that back with all of those weeds, so I need to clear out around it and get it going. You can see the drip line coming to it is the only reason it's still going. All these shrubs were planted 2 falls ago, so trying to get them up and going and established. Here's a close-up of what these nearly wild roses look like, and as you can see, they are prickly son of a gun. So trying to get in to prune those takes some welding gloves before you can get too close to them. But they kind of have a, you're not pruning for structure, basically just taking dead branches out, because you can see they're kind of a wild mass of roses, but they are very pretty. So here, stepping back, there's that concrete ditch. In the area I just showed you the roses and that shrub in, and I've got that fence, and then there's my backyard. You can see into the backyard, and I think that's where I'm headed next. So here's a lavender plant starting to wake up, so picking that up out of the I also have some gopher damage over on this side. These gopher holes are actually kind of dangerous. They run underneath that concrete ditch. So if my husband goes to water that field, it'll actually go through those gopher holes and dump all the water in my front yard, which then if that gets too full, dumps into my basement. So I got to keep an eye on these gopher holes that are along that concrete ditch, because they can cause me flooding issues later in the spring. Well, there's just a mass and tangle of weeds. This is actually, it looks, the brown in the center actually looks very weedy. That's one of my fall blooming asters. So once again, plant ID is pretty important, because that looks like it all needs to be ripped out, and I would be missing that plant. So when I planted my tree in the front yard, I did a really nice little stone circle around it and put mulch in the middle. And then the kids were kind of in charge of lawn control, and the grass has moved into the mulchy area, and now you can barely see these stones. So I've got to get in here and probably dig out the grass and then lightly treat with Roundup. I do have this tree in the center that I try not to damage. Right now the tree has a lot of suckers coming up out of it, and that's pretty common for a tree, especially this is a crabapple tree. I'm going to wait to trim these down. Sometimes trimming is a signal to the plant that you want it to increase growth in that area. They want to replace what was there before. So I'm going to wait a little later into spring before I mess with all those suckers. I don't want to encourage more to continue on. So there's a picture of what the tree looks like. I had to choose a small tree. As you can see, I've got power lines in the front and then a power line that runs on the side there. And I was really worried about a tree getting up into those lines. So the big juniper thing in the background was there when I moved there. That used to formerly be my mother-in-law's house 12 years ago. That thing is getting gigantic, and it holds a lot of wasps, and not my favorite shrub in the world, but it's green and it's growing, and you know, I'm still trying to work on that area where I moved the kraken, so it gets to stay. And then, you know, I talk about my mother-in-law's house, that house in the background there, that's how far I live from my mother-in-law. So you can kind of see why there's a bed and a plant screen there. Occasionally my husband will grow corn in that field, and that provides us some privacy over the summer, but otherwise she's just right there. My garden cart is there, as you can see, full of weeds. I've had this Rubbermaid cart for about 5 or 6 years. It's got solid tires on it, so it doesn't deflate with all the puncture vines, so that might be one of my favorite garden tools. And I'm now trained, the boys are playing soccer, so they'd have to take a break and drive my garden cart to the burn pile before I did the next load. This is the front of my house. So this shrub on the tag was only supposed to be 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide, and it's decided it's going to take over the world instead. So this is a decorative elderberry. I actually really like it. It has nice dark foliage and pink flowers, and The birds like it. The birds sit and chirp outside of the window, but it does beat against the windows when it's windy outside. There's a little tiny shrub on this left-hand side that was a rose of Sharon. As you can see, that's kind of leaning to the side and not looking so good. It's definitely took over its space. So even with the best red tags and attempting to not grow something in an area where it shouldn't be, I ended up with a gigantic plant right next to my house. So here's some more mallow issues. This is kind of up next to the house underneath that elderberry tree. So as you can see, mallow is one of my least favorite weeds and one of my main problems. This one is actually henbit. So this is right up next to the house. It's getting some warmth from the house. It's actually in the lamium family, which there are some decorative lamiums that you plant on purpose, but this is not one of them. So another weed that I've got to work on controlling. This is my butterfly bush, and it's actually doing quite well, coming back and growing. So excited to have it going. Here's some little hollyhock starts that are getting going. So this is I've mentioned before my Nankin cherry trees. This is one of my Nankin cherry shrubs. As you can see, I've got some gopher or vole damage next to that and some weed removal to do, but they're all budded out and will be blooming here in a couple weeks. Some more iris. These are my tomato cages from last year, so I gotta rip those out and get all the tomatoes pulled off of them so I can use them again. You can see underneath barely the raised beds that I have in the backyard to hold those cages. I can fit 3 of these cages in. I think it's a 4-foot by 4-foot box, so I shoved the tomatoes in there pretty close. This is my goji berry. Some of you got chunks of goji berry stick that you have growing, so I guess it's pretty easy to propagate. It has a tomato cage in the middle of it. When I originally planted it, it felt like it needed some support. So now it's kind of taken over that cage. Now that cage is starting to lean. So I'm thinking I might trim around and try to pull that cage off of it and clean it up a little bit. But it's definitely healthy and happy in the backyard. So this was more of a little iris bed, but this is also the dogs decided this is where they were going to sleep in the summer. It's a nice, nice area right by the back door. So you can see I still got a few little irises coming, but I've got some trash in there and some cheatgrass that I need to control. And it said my raised beds aren't very tall, so these are just, I believe they're 2x6s originally. But I do have a border and a path to kind of give me areas to protect. Here's looking out towards mother-in-law's house again. These are hollyhock sticks, so this whole border is hollyhocks, and so it provides me a little cover, a little colorful cover for going out in the field. This is in the very backyard, and this is a rugosa rose. So it started out in a 1-gallon container that my mother-in-law planted, and it has gone crazy. And every little piece of it, like I swear the flower petals have thorns on it. It's extremely thorny. We have burned it. We have ran it over with the loader. I've attempted to prune it and attempted to take my eye out with all the with all the stickers. So this just kind of does what it does. It catches tumbleweeds during the winter and holds it back. It does have very pretty yellow and orange flowers for about a week, but it's a pretty invasive guy for the backyard. Wouldn't know if I'd pick that again. Okay, so here's what my hoop house is currently looking like. So you can see that last hoop and wall. I've got some weeds growing from last year that I just couldn't face controlling or coming into this area, but I've got to get this cleaned up. The little white house kind of in the background was what we used for a chicken coop. I built that to raise chickens in. So my current plan, I think, is to remove that white cover and put a greenhouse cover on that, and then use that smaller house as my hoop house. So that one is 12 foot by 20 foot long, where this big hoop house was 20 foot by 30 foot. So I have some areas that are close to my garden, but not mine. So this is behind the RV shed. So my husband usually comes in here and tries to round up once or twice a year to keep this under control, just so that we don't accidentally light the RV shed on fire. But And also this pipe here wouldn't fare well with an accidental fire. So I have some challenges is in that, you switch responsibility from my responsibility to my husband's responsibility for weeds, and sometimes we don't have the same management plan. So this is this is kind of gross. This is my in the chicken house. So we cleaned out all the chicken stuff, and then we're like, oh, we have this covered area, and the boys decided, oh, we could put a pool in there. But then we didn't rinse out and take care of the pool quite like we should. So I currently have this pool set up in the area that I might have a greenhouse eventually. So I have to figure out where the pool is going next and how we're getting that all cleaned up. So yes, we'll just go past that one. So this area used to be a rose garden. My mother-in-law had planted roses in here. I'd actually come in and put the landscape fabric in the rock and has attempted to control the weeds around the roses. Then the roses got way too big and I couldn't get between. She had probably 25 roses in this small area, and I couldn't get in to prune them or do anything with them. So the roses, a lot of them had fire blight. They had insects. They hadn't been pruned correctly in the beginning. So it was really hard to try to get them back to what they should look like. So this is an area that's in development. So I've got to get the rock and the landscape fabric back out of here and try again in this space. Okay, we just about made it around. So this is my weed pile. This is where all of my trash comes when I'm not burning it. A quasi compost pile. So the plan is for the husband to pick this up with the loader and move it to the back 40 and either finish composting or set it on fire. And so I also have an audience anytime I garden. So this is the heifer pen that's right next to the yard. And so they see that I'm here. So these guys have been weaned, about 6 months ago. So they still remember bottles and that I am their friend. So here they come. And then every time you're trying to work out in the garden, here they are, and they're licking you through the fence and mooing and peeing, and it's blowing in the wind. So they're like having 3-year-olds right there with you. Luckily, there's a fence between me and them. At least they have cute faces. Okay, here's this front flower bed that I showed you that had the Rudbeckia and Giardia in it. All the pine needle trash seems to come this direction, and I've got some cleanup to do. The dogs have been laying in there the last couple months and have smashed a few of the flowers. This is my new favorite tool. This is a weed burner attached to a propane tank. So I'm trying my hand at flaming the weeds. So this works really good on young weed seedlings. So hoping to give that more of a try. And this is the front flower bed that had the bindweed issues. So you can see up the trellises, there's still remnants of bindweed trying to climb those. But I actually pulled that whole bed out and have round up. So I've got one little hollyhock living there next to the foundation and some cheatgrass that has come in around the border. But otherwise, not much growing in there. There is a little pile. I had a perennial 4 o'clock that I attempted to move, and I must have missed part of the root because it came back up there too. So now I'm trying to decide if that gets to stay and I'm going to try to work around it, or if that has to go so that I can get this cleaned up for spring and replanted. But looking forward to having this be a nice area. And once again, trying to decide with that bindweed if I've got enough control of it to put perennials back in here, or if I need to stick with annuals for a couple years until I'm sure I'm rid of my bindweed issue. And we also have a broken window on the house. None of the boys will take credit for that. So I've got it's a double paned window, so that is not open into the house, just one layer, but probably not helping our energy efficiency at all. Okay, so here's looking out onto the yard again. You can see the double sucker goals in the trees. So here's the kind of gives you an idea of size of the area that I'm working with. Oh, went back. And here's down that flower bed, so that the other area that I'm attempting to figure out how to manage and how to fix my disappearing rock path in the background. So the dead trees, those have actually been dead for a while now. We had a neighbor across the street before we switched ownership, and we moved into this house, and my mother-in-law moved into the new house. And I believe he used 2,4-D and took out these trees. The one we've cut down, we've got a stump. The other one needs to come down, and then there's that sickly-looking pine tree in the background. So don't ask me too much about tree control, obviously, because I I don't have very many mature trees of my own. So some of the tools I have available, this is my husband's four-wheeler, and so he does have a weed sprayer. So for large areas, he's able to drive that around and spray large amounts of chemical control for doing the ditch banks. And the one year he walked past and turned it on next to my flower bed, and I about had a conniption fit, and it had just water in it. It's when he was first putting these on, he was making sure the pump was working. So I'm like, no, my garden. Oh, kind of ornery. So I'm working on right now trying to plant some seeds. I've got some tomatoes started and trying to think, if I'm going to put some of these into annual beds, that I probably should get some annual flowers up and going. To fill all those areas, you can imagine the hundreds of dollars it would cost to go to the nursery and get annual flowers. So I'm definitely going to have to grow my own if I want to focus on the annuals. This was a project I took on this week, and this is a perennial sunflower, so a Maximilian sunflower, and it's just starting to green up. So here I'm going to try to pop this out of the ground. It's currently living in the backyard, and I'm thinking about taking chunks of it and splitting it up and sticking it in those gopher holes in the front yard. So, there's already a hole dug. I might as well take advantage and plant some stuff out there with the yarrow. This is the border you can see on the left-hand side. That would be the side of my raised beds, and this was my border material. So I'd put landscape fabric down, and then this was actually old corn silage. So corn silage that my husband didn't feed the cows and kind of kicked off to the side, and actually kind of has the appearance of bark mulch when it gets a little bit older. So I have to decide if I'm going to refill this and cover up the fabric with more corn silage leftovers, or actually go get bark mulch, or completely take the landscape fabric out and go another direction, because once dirt builds up on top of that fabric, then it's going to grow weeds just as nicely as the raised beds will. So some management decisions to figure out there. Oh, and here's we actually had a farm tour last night in between Jim County and Caldwell, and this cow's name, I believe, was Lucky, and she's an Aberdeen Angus, or short line Angus. So they're a miniature breed. You can see she looks like a full-size Angus with little tiny legs. So, not one of my cows, not my place. This picture kind of slipped in there, but she was a cute thing. So that's the end of my tour. As you can see, I've got lots to work on in my own garden. So I wanted to kind of show you behind the curtain. I have all these great ideas and know about a lot of stuff, but I still have my own challenges, and time probably being one of the main challenges. But lots of weed and pest issues that I myself have to deal with. So I hope this gives you a little bit of that I'm right there with you, that you probably have, maybe your issues and beds are smaller and not as big as mine, so maybe it'll be motivational that if I can make mine work out, that you can too. And I'm hoping this is kind of to keep me in control too, is that I can show you later into the spring and into the summer and into the fall how my garden changes, and how the weed issues progress, and what we see with each season as it comes. So sorry again that I couldn't be live with you, but hopefully you enjoyed watching this video, and it gives you some ideas about weed control and different management decisions that I have to make and that you might have to make in the future. Okay, we'll be live again next Tuesday, and looking forward to our next meeting. We've got the 23rd for my Jim County Master Gardeners, and then Ann and Jeff, we're meeting on the 24th, and then we will be done with our hands-on days, and the webinars will continue through April, and we'll definitely talk way more about all this pest management and what to do about all these problems. So thanks.